Hello there and a very good evening. It's the 23rd of May 2016. This is Face the Nation live on TV1. I'm Sonali Wanigabadage, sitting in for your regular host Shami Rasuddin, who's taking a well-deserved break, but he'll be back with you soon. Now today was a significant day in the capital Maharaja calendar. The the final report was handed over to the UN Assistant Secretary of State for Humanitarian Affairs by Group Director Siobhan Daniel. This was done at the first ever UN World Humanitarian Summit. Now Sri Lanka has, over the past few days, been at the mercy and at the wrath of Mother Nature, as several hundreds of thousands of people were affected by the inclement weather conditions, the flooding and the landslides. Over 90 persons lost their lives and over 100 are reported missing. So is Sri Lanka ready to face disaster, natural disaster? Can we face calamity? And are we prepared to mitigate this? To talk about this and more, we have with us in our studios tonight an eminent panel of guests. Let me introduce them to you. On to my left is retired Major Dhammika Navaratne. He is the Assistant Director, Emergency Operations at the Disaster Management Center. Good evening and thank you for being on our show tonight. We also have with us Uchitha De Souza. He is a Sustainability Advisor to the Ministry of Sustainable Development and Wildlife. Thanks for being on the show tonight. And finally, we have with us Vidura Ralapanava. He is an environmentalist, been with us on the show several times before this. Welcome to the show. We also tried to get the disaster management ministry officials to join us, as well as an official from the Land Reclamation and Development Corporation. However, due to other commitments, I believe relief work, they were unable to join us on tonight's show. Let's start off our first round. My first question is to Major Dhammika Navaratne. Now, the Disaster Management Center is one of the key pivotal players when a disaster takes place. However, with the recent floods and landslides, something that we saw was that the initial responses came from other stakeholders, individuals, the private sector. We ourselves were witness to it. The Sirasa Shakti Sahanayatra program saw an outpouring of relief pouring in. So do you believe, in 3 minutes, that the DMC did enough to deal with the immediate aftermath of this recent disaster? Your time starts now.
Yeah, I think we did our best to recover. And this is not the first time that we face a lot of disasters like this from 2005. But since then, 2005, from that onward, we were engaged with disaster. And this time also we really respond immediately to the disaster, as well as we had given our early warning message to the vulnerable communities, as well as the mass media really help us, as well as during the disaster also all the stakeholders, NGOs, INGOs and government organizations also with us. And because of that, it is not only the disaster management, it is the whole country, as holistically everybody help us, and we being the key agency, it was very successful for us to implement our role and tasks and duties to safeguard the vulnerable communities in this disaster.
As someone representing the DMC, what is the mechanism that is in place to ensure that the citizens, that the people of Sri Lanka have a better knowledge and understanding of disasters taking place?
Yes,
is there such a mechanism, first of all?
Definitely we have such a mechanism because earlier we did not have, but today there are so many programs that we have conduct, not only the disaster management set itself, but the INGOs, NGOs, even in the school curriculums, we are educating people, school children, even the stakeholders, three forces, police, awareness programs are conducting, mitigation programs are on way, and media, of course, doing a very good job to educate people and so many mechanisms, especially we use technology, latest technology that we have catered from so many Western countries, especially early morning. We have 77 towers right around the countries to disseminate our messages to the last mile post and the last man in the village, as well as we have telephone systems, radio HF, VHF systems, and Turaya system where the so many communication system plays to educate people and to give the message even during disasters, before disaster and after the disaster. I think mechanism is okay, successfully in place for us to work with, but there are some places where we have to improve in future.
So, Major Navaratna, finally, you do agree that much more has to be done in terms of disaster preparedness for Sri Lanka?
Definitely, because this is, as holistically, we cannot work alone. I feel that there are 4 elements, 4 components that we have to think of. Like first thing is the government mechanism, decision taken by politicians through the parliament, what they do, how they are going to do the special disaster risk reduction system, and also the stakeholders, government agencies, corporates, and even the Chamber of Commerce are involved with us, and how they act, how they react, and how they cooperate with us. And also the general public should help us, because we have a big problem about disseminating our messages, as also we have found that the people are not ready to accept our messages, maybe because of the way they think, the attitudes that they have, but still we do our level best to specially disseminate the message and get the people out of from danger. And also, so all the elements must come together. It's not disaster management set itself we cannot do. Holistically, we all must get together. Like it's like a vehicle running with 4 wheels. So government should work with us, public sector, private sector, NGOs, INGOs, and 3 forces, media. So although the disaster management center has established to communicate and coordinate the entire system, but holistically the entire country should work together.
All right, thank you very much, Major Navaratna. Next, I'd like to come to Mr. Uchitha D'Souza, Sustainability Advisor to the Ministry of Sustainable Development and Wildlife. Mr. D'Souza, Sri Lanka is a signatory to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainability Development. In fact, President Maithripala was the signatory on behalf of the country. Do you believe that we are fulfilling our responsibilities in terms of what has been agreed upon?
Sonali, first of all, I think it's critically important to understand and comprehend on the magnitude of what climate change is on a global scale. The global scale climate change comprehension tells us that we are no longer an isolated nation, and in that scenario, Sri Lanka becomes part and parcel of a climate change future that we are going to inherit. That is the first premise. Second premise is that Sri Lanka needs to also take stock on our baselines, where we stand today, whether it's on our ecological footprint, whether it's on our carbon emissions, whether it's on our economic growth, and then look at what kind of futures that we can plan into, and that those futures must be sustainable. That is where I think your question lies. Yes, Sri Lanka is one of the 193 signatories to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development signed last year, September, at the UNGA in New York. But again, Sri Lanka also signed on to the Paris Climate Agreement at the same time. So we have tremendous responsibility as a nation towards planning for sustainability. Now, said that, coming back to the current status where the country is, and why have we done enough in disaster preparedness? Now that is a big question that we need to all take stock on. We've had a tsunami which we were not at all prepared, and no one was prepared in this world. Since then, I think we have come a long way, and I think setting up the Disaster Management Center is a fantastic idea. But as Dhammika said, we are far away from being seriously prepared. What preparedness means needs to be analyzed very seriously as well. Firstly, I think preparedness is something that needs to have various tools and readiness with those tools. Now, as media, as public, as analysts, and as decision makers, we'll all have to go back and see whether all the decisions and tools that we developed during the past 7-8 years, whether it has worked, whether we brought them together, and did it work at this moment of time in need. That is where the answers must lie. And also, it cannot be for temporary patchwork given a disaster. It must be for long-term sustainability, and not to make sure that we have climate refugees left hanging around and becoming a burden to the economy as well.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Uchitha De Souza, Sustainability Advisor to the Ministry of Sustainable Development and Wildlife. Finally, Vidura Ralapanava, environmentalist. How are the effects of climate change impacting Sri Lanka, and how do we respond in terms of mitigation and adaptation?
Yeah, so we need to remember that the particular disaster that occurred in the last week is primarily a climate-driven one. It's not that we have not had storm events in the month of May in the past. But this was a particular severe one. I was actually following the storm track. It was quite interesting the way the storm actually ventured into the country and moved out in a slightly, in a perpendicular direction to the wind pattern. So this is kind of a very unusual thing that happened. The reason why we have a disaster of this magnitude is driven by two different things. One is the actual amount of moisture that's in the air, which is increasing when the temperature is increasing. Now we know we just came through a significant heat event where we broke all our heat records by about 2 degrees across the country. In fact, India is having a significant one now where the temperature has gone up to 51 degrees in the northern part. Every time the temperature goes up, the amount of moisture that the air is holding increases. So every rainfall event becomes an intense rainfall event. So this is a problem. And what created this particular incident is a very localized rainfall driven by a disturbance in the Bay of Bengal. Now the problem we are going to have is that with the warming trend that we are having with climate change, these type of events are going to continue to happen, and the intensity of these events are going to continue to increase. Now this brings us into the two interesting points that you made. We have two pathways to respond to this, and the first pathway is that, okay, this type of a problem is going to happen, it's going to be worse year after year as we go along. We need to take mitigatory actions. Now we know the warming is driven by carbon emissions, so part of the mitigation action should start from how do we stop or reduce the emissions that people in the world is putting out, and then that includes us. The second part is that mitigation is not enough, because already we crossed what we call the stable limits of climate. We've already crossed that. So if this type of events are going to happen irrespective of how intense our mitigatory actions are, we come to the second thing: how do we do what we call adaptation? How do we adapt to this new climate reality, where this type of rainfall events, droughts and heat waves that we had earlier, as well as issues like sea level rise, is going to be a continuous problem. It's a bigger problem for us because of three things. We are a small island nation, so that has a particular set of impacts. We are in the tropics, that has a particular type of impact. Our climate system is driven by rainfall patterns driven by two monsoon winds, that has a impact. So all of this creates a particular type of conditions. Now when we say whether we are ready for disaster or not, we need to take stock of that in the context of what type of rainfall events, what type of drought events can we expect in the near future and the longer future. And sometimes planning for this type of events may be almost impossible. So your assessment of whether we are adequately prepared depends on what type of a climate future that we are looking at. So I think that is where we need to start from.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ralapanava. Today's topic of discussion centers around disaster preparedness and disaster risk reduction, disaster resilience. Is Sri Lanka really ready to take on natural disasters? Well, I'd like to begin the Q&A with our panel of journalists this evening. On to my immediate right is Nadeem Majid. Hi, Nadeem.
Good evening, Sonali.
And Faraz Shaukat Ali, thank you for being on the show tonight.
Good evening, Sonali.
And Charita Fernando. Floor's all yours, guys.
Yeah. My question is for Mr. De Souza. The cost of this disaster, the economic cost, is estimated to be between 1.5 to $2 billion. Do you reckon that this is a direct result of develop now, clean up later policy?
$1.5 billion a disaster at today must be looked into the future as well, and into multiplied by what? Now, if it is into X number of occurrences and we do not have a plan, 1.5 billion now might not be enough at all. And then the sympathy on collecting the kind of 1.5 billion for this might not be coming in the future, because loads of people will be in disaster prone situations. Firstly, we must understand that 50% of the global population currently lives in urban scenarios. Around 2030, this is going to go up to about 60%, and the prediction says that in the world around 2050, 80% of the world population will be living in urban scenarios. Now this is where, Sonali, your question about the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which is the primary document which talks about transforming the world into a sustainable world order in 2030, comes up with 17 sustainable development goals, and goal number 11 exactly deals about urbanization, resilience of cities, and managing disaster reduced environments. So the question is not whether 1.5 billion is big enough or small enough. It is about what have we done during the past. I said, are we satisfied with the tools that we have prepared? Have we networked those tools? Are we using those tools to the best potential that we have? And are we integrating the entire nation's systems into a single effective unit to respond through the systems? It is not about just being aware and sensitive. It is about being sensitive and being able to act and react in a quick moment. That is part of the question, answer. Second is that where does this money go into? Does this money go into keeping people not hungry and keeping people not from being angry on the streets? Or are we looking at bringing people back fast, rapidly into the well-being levels that they should be, and bringing them into the economic process? Now that is where the 1.5 billion could make magic. If it is not just going to go quickly out and finish, and that millions of people will be destitute, I think the efforts have been wasted.
Major Navaratna, I'd like to ask you a question about first responders in terms of the natural disasters the natural disaster situation that we have right now. We can see that the military especially does most of the first responder work. Military teams have been fast, or relatively fast, in getting to disaster areas like in Aranayaka and flood-stricken areas in Colombo and Gampaha. My question is the government doing enough in terms of providing equipment and support to these first responders to ensure that they are able to carry out a better service?
Of course, in this situation, we have actually National Emergency Operation Plan. It has to be approved by the Parliament. It is almost completed. The resource what we have at the moment, we have to pool at the disaster time. Especially we really depend on three forces and the police since they have enough equipments. But still, we have another resource database where we can get resource at the time of a disaster. But still, there are certain areas where we have to look into, like especially during this flood situation. I was handling this, as you said, this sending boats and air recce plus rescue missions. But we couldn't go closer to their houses because we didn't have small craft, right? So, as my colleague said, we have to pay a lot of attention on research and analysis. And like other Western countries, actually even America has said once, Sri Lanka is #1 response country for disaster. But from preparation side, we are very low. I think I have to agree with my colleague. That is the culture of our country that we have to change. We have the resources, sometimes enough resources, but whether we can pool them at the time of a disaster, whether the government mechanism is ready to do that. It is not the resources what we have, it is a mechanism that we are putting in place. And I can remember when my colleague said it is 1.5 billion. So if you look into this tsunami 2005, 86.38 billion, whereas 2005 our export income was 16,000 millions from tea, rubber and coconut. So you can see whether we can bear up that much of amount. So we are not in a position. Even 2005 our per capita income was very small amount.
Major Navaratnam, for the Disaster Management Center, in effectively carrying out its duties, what is the biggest obstacle that you're facing?
I couldn't get you a question like obstacle mean.
What is the biggest obstacle that you're facing? Is it just about networking and pooling resources, or is it blocks from policymakers, from decision-makers in government?
I think the biggest question we have is we have to revise the entire system, because 2005, number 13 of 2005 Act came through the Parliament, and the National Council was formed. The chairman is His Excellency the President and the opposition leader and responsible line ministries, and the Act says many resources, how to use, what to use and what time. But the problem is we have to go for a big revision national level, because 2005 after the subsequent to the tsunami, we just established the Disaster Management Center. We have to see whether that Disaster Management Center is can they cater for 2016. If you go to this international level, the Sendai framework from 2015-2013, they have listed so much of disaster risk reduction methods that we have to adopt in cooperation with the international. But we are far below actually. When I see that we have to redo, it is happening everywhere, especially in Sri Lanka. When you apply something, you apply, but after that you don't look. Now if you go to Japan, they have a lot of system to see whether the things are operating after putting things. But there's a big problem about that. So big revision should be done. The Act should be amended as soon as possible.
Major, what's the how much of the government's budget in terms of percentage or in terms of money, how much was allocated for the Disaster Management Center?
That of course yearly they allocate as per the requirement that we project through proposals, and later on they have emergency fund, and through that also we can get, and when we request they give. I think there is no red tapes at this moment, because government has even recently stated that no red tapes, no barriers, you can do what you want, because I don't think there is no big barrier about the financial requirement. Only thing is how much we are trying to get from them, and whether we can pool the other resources rather than using the government money. I think that is why I said the revision should reveal everything. Right.
Paras?
Can I ask you, Vidura, this question? Why do such disasters happen? Is it just too much of water? Why?
I think there's a nice phrase to this, and it's called loading the climate dice. The interesting thing is most of human civilization developed in a time frame the global climate was actually quite stable. So climate system is a very complex system. It's interconnected to all other systems that's in the planet. The planet has been able to keep all of these systems in a particular type of equilibrium, and our development as a civilization, a global human civilization, this is not about a country, actually corresponded to a very stable climatic system. Now it's quite interesting because Professor Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia University did a research study probably about 20 years ago, where he essentially said that if you look at economic growth is actually related to the amount of natural disasters you as a country is facing. So the more natural disasters you get exposed to, you have less capacity to develop. What is going on now is because of a continuous use of fossil fuels, with adding carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we have actually changed the equilibrium that the climate system was running on. Okay, so for example, if you want to see numbers, the past 12 months has been the warmest 12 months. Not only it has been the warmest 12 months, but each month has been the warmest ever recorded in human history. And our human history recording actually started from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. No, well, sorry, I take it back. About 1880 is when we started recording. Right? We broke all the records in February because it's the warmest month ever recorded on the planet. Now, we sometimes tend to think purely on the temperature, but we have to remember a storm's power is also related to the ocean surface temperature. Now, we were looking at a quite interesting scenario because Indian Ocean has been heating up in the last 50 years. Right? We've had quite significant heat problem this year. The temperature in Indian Ocean went up to 31.5 degrees both on the Trincomalee side as well as in Manna. So we had our two prime coral reefs, Bar Reef and the Pigeon Island and the Trincomalee coral reefs, actually on a bleaching watch. Now when you get a storm system that is starting up in a period where the ocean temperature is actually warmer, right, it just gives more power to the system. Now this particular storm that we were looking at in the last week actually developed very fast and moved very fast. So one of the, we were in fact lucky, because if storm system moved much slower, we would have had a much bigger impact. So the continuous adding of carbon dioxide and the warming that we have subjected the whole planet to is going to continuously create more and more these type of incidents. So we need to be really thinking about it. Now for me, I sometimes I listen to all the preparedness work in a kind of with a little bit of irony, because this is like playing, the Sinhala word is Horapolis, right? There's a disaster, we run, okay, let's recover, how do we respond, all of this. With the kind of frequency that we are getting these type of disasters, you cannot do this anymore. In this, we had a tremendous outpouring of people's sympathy. They are coming together, putting money. It was not the rich person, poor person, everybody contributed. I have not seen anything like this. Possibly the last time we saw it was during the tsunami. It was absolutely amazing. How many times can we keep doing this? Are you ready to do this every year? Do we have a capacity to do it every year? Can we go and ask other countries to support us every year? How often can you do it? And this is what Uchita, you were saying, because it's not only in Sri Lanka, this is happening all across the world. We are going to run out of our capacity to feel for the person who's affected, because it keeps happening all the time. So we need to look at a very different development paradigm, which on one side looks at how do we mitigate this impending storm, and on the other side, how do we develop and rethink how we build our cities, how we build our communities, so that not that we are planning for disaster relief, but we are planning on how do we avoid this. How do we avoid the massive level of impact that we are having? How do we mitigate the impact? How do we ensure that we don't have so much of damage every year, every season? I think this is where our real planning has to be. And if you don't do this, we cannot keep catching up.
Major Navaratna, on the topic of avoiding disasters, the Disaster Management Center, we usually in the media at least, we hear of the Disaster Management Center whenever there is a landslide, a drought, or a major storm. But the Disaster Management Center is active throughout the year. What sort of work is the DMC doing with other stakeholders to prevent disasters? For example, with the Forest Conservation Department, with the Department of Coast Conservation, the Environment Ministry, the Central Environment Authority. Is the Disaster Management Center also an active participant in disaster risk reduction?
I would like to start my this session with my colleague's statement. As you raised another question about the climatic change. Actually, the people can see flood, drought, but how many of them know about what are the factors effect for those things? Hydraulic factors, biological factors, atmospheric factors, so many things to be considered. Like that is why I said we have to do a lot of researchers along with universities and all that. So coming to your question, of course, that is what I said at the initial stage. We have National Emergency Operation Plan that we have made with them, right? So it is about to go to the Parliament for approval. Once it comes, we have identified their role and tasks. Each and every organization have to play a big role during disaster. There are three stages: before a disaster, during the disaster, and after the disaster. So each and everybody will get their responsibilities. So once that approved, so the stakeholders have to act according to the role and task given by that emergency operation plan. Of course, things will work smoothly, but as my colleague said, giving relief or expecting more disasters in future also, it is not the thing that we have to do in future. As a country, we must get together. Actually, God has blessed with us that we do not have much disasters like other countries. If you go to Philippines, there are 28 approximately cyclone per year. So you can see how many earthquakes in Japan. But luckily, we are not in a safe, very much bad, vulnerable country like other countries. But still, we have to improve a lot to face this situation, because what happened, today we discuss, but tomorrow we switch on to something else. Once again, there will be another disaster. People rally around, collect food. Actually, we are far below the level of response when you consider with other countries. We have to use best practices. Okay, we'll say there will be big cyclone which may affect the entire country. Who is going to carry relief bags? We must have a system, plan in place, very professional system. So if you go to Indonesia, they have made a mechanism when there is a tsunami, how people should withdraw, how people should be evacuated. When you go to Japan, the child goes to the evacuation center, father and mother go to their center and they exchange their children and all that. The system should be placed. That is why I said this subject is a vital subject today in Sri Lanka, but the subject will open the book when there is a disaster.
Major Naratna, I want to ask you.
I'm afraid we'll have to go in for a short commercial break. We'll be right back with the next round. Stay with Face the Nation. Hello there, a very good evening and welcome back. If you're just tuning in, you're watching Face the Nation live on TV1. We're discussing the future of Sri Lanka in terms of disaster risk reduction and resilience. Well, to start off our next round, Vidura Ralapanava. Do you think that as Sri Lanka has also committed to the Paris Climate Agreement, at the very inception, do you think Sri Lankans, as in I mean the masses, are they aware of what climate change is?
Actually, no. I think our, as a nation, our climate literacy is quite poor. I actually went and asked some of the universities, and most of the universities, actually even some of the universities who are conducting degree programs on environmental science, what they teach related to climate change is absolutely atrocious. So we have a problem that is coming from ground up. And what it has done is that we have policymakers and bureaucrats. You know, forget about the politicians. Even if you keep the bureaucrat level, when you do not know or when you do not understand what climate change is and what the problems are and what is our pathway as humanity. And I'm using these words very carefully because there are some people who think, you know, humanity is one thing, Sri Lanka is one thing, let the humanity do whatever they want, Sri Lanka should do something else. So when they take decisions, this lack of climate literacy is actually taking us down the wrong pathway. And the most classical example that I've seen on this is related to, now we know climate change is primarily driven by emissions, and emissions are, majority of the emissions are coming from burning of fossil fuels. So when we go to organizations like Ceylon Electricity Board, this lack of climate literacy is actually hurting us, because when we plan our energy future, we seem to be planning thinking that we are possibly living in another planet which does not have an issue like climate change. So what I see is this lack of climate literacy is actually hurting our capacity to plan for a future where we can both mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change.
Okay, so we spoke about the masses. Do you believe, going forward, do you think that the 225 parliamentarians who represent us in parliament are aware of what climate change is? I'm asking you in your opinion as an energy expert, as an environmentalist, because we need to proceed from this point forth. But if the masses aren't aware, as you say, do you think the people who represent us are?
I've actually seen some politicians who are quite clued into this. And I think the president is really aware of it, and we saw his bold steps with respect to Sampur coal power plant. I've seen, for example, Minister Susil Premjant, who has taken a very active step, especially as the Minister of Science and Technology. I've heard Minister Champika Ranawaka earlier.
As a whole.
I don't think it happens as a whole. I think what we are looking at is isolated individuals who seems to be aware because of maybe through exposure in their specific, but I don't see this generally happening as a policy level.
So how do we go about rectifying this situation?
Good question. I wish I knew the answer.
All right. Moving on to Mr. De Souza, do you believe that the citizenry is disempowered in the context of disaster preparedness? If so, how does sustainability feature in all of this?
First of all, The disengagement comes from a whole nation's approach into policy planning to implementation, which is completely fragmented. The different ministries and the different sectoral approaches are not coherent. So coherence planning, when coherent planning is missing, and fragmentation and territoriality becomes precedence, it becomes extremely hard for rest of the nation to be in line or be plugged in to it. There's no way. But the question is, what is happening? Why is this happening? First of all, from one of the previous statements coming from Vidura as well, everything bottles down to what kind of ideology that guides us into development. If growth continues to be the nation's primary belief that development will come through, then we need to revisit what we are talking about. The question is not about whether we grow or not, whether the economy grows or not. What happens to growth? What is the quality of growth? How inclusive is growth? Now those are the questions. But then there are fundamental questions that has not been answered or attempted at, which is what we are trying to attempt in the transformation dialogue, which we are planning to launch on the 3rd of June, is basically, first of all, we need to ask where we do not want to go in this country. What is the worst case scenario? Do we know that? Have we ever planned for that? Second is, if we have such a plan for worst case scenario, what is the best case scenario? Where do we want our country to be in another 50 years, 100 years, whatever? Thirdly, do we know where we stand today? What are our baselines? What kind of data do we have to show that our baselines are what we are getting out of reports? If we do not know the answers for these three, how are we going to plan scenarios for transition? Now, if that is why what we are going through such a lot of disasters and asking these questions on and on and on again. But the answers, if you don't probe your questions and if you don't get into scenarios building and base your baselines on actual data, and the data revolution needs to happen now. And then planning must go to people who do understand scenarios and who can build on scenarios, who can bring in not just political motivation but rational, scientific and human outcomes and wisdom including.
Thank you very much. Major Navaratna, when the 2004 tsunami struck, Sri Lanka was absolutely clueless. But then came the 2005 Disaster Management Act, and with it the DMC was established, there was a roadmap designed, and so on and so forth. But then we had Media Bedda, and now we have Aranayaka. How many lessons are we going to learn? Your time starts now.
Yeah, we cannot stop disaster. We can't fight with the nature. So we have to work with the nature. As my friend said, where we stand, the question is that. Even I can remember America was failed in Californian fire. But that time, not today. After that, they wanted to find out the best method. So they introduced incident command system. And even Sri Lankan people went and studied that system. And we have brought that system to Sri Lanka, India. In that, we have found that the new system is applied. Likewise, we have to find out systems, methods. We can't stand at the same place at the same way. If you do the same thing, we get the same result. So we have to change immediately. Drastic change should be happen as soon as possible if we really want to face future. Because we have to do a lot of researches. We have to revisit, and we must see the consequence of all the incidents. Not only Media Bedda, not only tsunami, even small scale disasters are happening everywhere. You see drowning, 4 person per 1,100,000 in Sri Lanka. And recently, I think His Excellency the President started a new program about cleaning of coastal belt and putting garbage to the sea. We are also in the 5th, we are in between 1st and 5th. So likewise, even accident if you take, The accident will be third in 2020. We have done a research through UNDP. Accident will come third place in disaster in 2020. So we have to put all this data into one bucket and see how far we are ready to face the future consequences. That is why at the initial stage I said there are 4 elements, especially the government, the political decisions on disaster risk reduction. And as we know, we are a developing country. Especially when there is when a country is developing, disaster risk reduction is a prime duty, prime component that we have to look in. If you see how many highways we have made, what is the percentage of disaster risk reduction system applied for those things. Even the recent past disaster about this Kalani river flood, if you go to that area, you can see where the boundary is and how many people have encroached into that. What is the political decision? What is the culture of people? What is the attitudes of the people? Now we announced, we disseminated the message, okay, now 3 feet, 4 feet, 7 feet, still people are there. 10 feet, still people will be there. So is it the disaster management system that we are looking for in future? So, and also the scientific aspects of human behavior we have never touched upon. Other countries have gone up. The psychological aspects of human behavior, the attitudes of the human behavior. Now see, when you compare with animal and human being, when there is a bomb, all the animals will run away. They run as much as they can, and as the time they see or think that they are safe, and then they look back and see what has happened. But say 5 people of human being, one want to see the bomb, one want to see whether there is a bomb, one want to say, okay, I am safe. Likewise, the attitudes we have to change. Whether we like or not, we have to change the attitudes through media, through awareness, through law. Now even certain countries like Indonesia, they have passed down a law. You can go and take people out of their houses when there is a disaster. But we can't do that. We do not have any legal authority, legitimate authority. So that is why I said revision of act, revision of policies, revision of attitudes, revision of culture. Today we talk here, but tomorrow we don't know whether we will be in a flood. Don't know whether we are under the ground. So disaster is always behind us. Now 2005, tsunami was eye-opening. Now this incident, not only the eye lid opening. So how many years we have to wait like this? So everybody must get together. National forum should be, there should be a big national forum to discuss this matter in a very going to grassroots level and to see how we can face in future.
All right. Thank you very much, Major Navaratna. Faraz, I'd like you to ask the first question this time.
Thank you. Vidura, this is for you. How essential is proper planning in terms of our power requirements in the context of global warming and so on?
I think it's quite critical. I want to look at it from a fairly broader point of view. We currently have something like 405 parts per million carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. Even if you go through Paris summit, if all the countries stick to their commitments that they made in the Paris summit, and we go and reduce our emissions on a continuous basis, we're still going to end up at 450 or 500 parts per million of carbon dioxide. But what we actually know now, even the 400 parts per million is actually not stable. The scientific consensus, as much as it can come to, actually says that we have to be somewhere around 350 parts per million. So, we have to reduce if we want any kind of climate stability in this planet. If that is the context that we are looking at, why are we trying to go and put the most polluting power generation method in this country? And I'm not only talking about carbon pollution, I'm talking about pollution in all aspects, from dust to sulfur dioxide to nitrous oxide to hot water, everything. When there are cheaper alternatives and better alternatives are available. To me, this does not make any sense at all. There are a lot of people, when we speak about it, speak very disparagingly about environmentalists, and I recently saw somebody saying, India has hundreds of coal power plants, China has hundreds of coal power plants. We had a senior bureaucrat saying, what is the problem of us having a couple of them? And I'm thinking about it. 15 of the 30 most polluted cities are currently located in India. And quite a larger number of them also in China. Is this what we want for Sri Lanka? Why, this type of one-sided arguments, it doesn't make sense. For me, I spend quite a lot of time actually doing climate research before my current job. So I understand the climate system. I understand the threat that we are facing, and I have small daughters. And I understand the kind of a planet that we are going to put them in charge. And the only thing we can say is that we are awfully, awfully sorry for what we have done. Now, I don't want us to be in a situation where we keep adding more coal power plants, because from the level of apology we have to make now, you cannot make a bigger apology than that.
I was actually hoping to ask this question from the official from the Land Reclamation Corporation who was to join us this evening, but since she is not present, I'll pose this question to you in your capacity as a sustainability advisor and an activist for sustainable development. We saw the Minister of Disaster Management, Minister Anurupriya Darshanayapa, said that one of the main causes for the flooding to be so severe, to have such a severe impact on people's lives, is the reclamation of land in the Kalani Basin, the wanton reclamation of land which has been done without any sort of procedure. Then today, this evening, the President's Media Division announced that all land reclamation in the Colombo district is hereby prohibited and existing permits have been cancelled. My question to you is, one, as a sustainability advisor to this government, you spoke about the data revolution and the need to act on solid, real information. Does this decision strike you as a decision that has been made taking into consideration real data? And two, how will this affect the Megapolis project?
I think best is to start from where the Megapolis is. Now, Megapolis, the actual word must be megalopolis. Megapolis means big, megalopolis means great. Now, that is where the confusion starts into planning big things. That is where human encroachment on earth and its resources happens. It's a mentality of conquering earth. And we do understand that we can't conquer. That is the first fundamental of this. Now, in an era where climate disasters are frequenting us, we, from the sustainability aspect, thinkers' paradigms, we talk about ecopolis. But ecopolis could be, hypothetical to many who cannot comprehend with ecosystem services what that means. Then regulations for and not for is another question. Can regulations stop the magnitude of impacting on the earth? by populations, or whether the macro planning must take into consideration not just spatial planning and development into the economic growth model, but looking at what kind of spatial planning requires human habitation, which does not require human habitation, and which should be left alone. Now, in areas where flooding is required for the ecosystem to be an ecosystem, must be allowed to flood, and humans must be kept in places where humans are safe and where resilience is possible. Where resilience is not possible, you go and try to build resilience based infrastructure, you are asking for trouble. Now, you are not asking for just trouble of disasters impacting on humans, you are asking for economic complete massacres. And economic massacres are through short-term, short-sighted planning. Now, what the government has taken as a decision today might have had its own reasoning. Now, those reasoning needs to be obviously questioned, and comprehended it in a more logical sequence. But it's obvious that encroachment cannot happen for either needs of destitution or needs of political requirement. People must not be left out, whoever they are. You can't marginalize groups, and the alternative is not to put people on the streets, but to provide people well-being at the minimum level that human dignity and human well-being requires. So, whatever the plan, needs to ensure that these people move from where they were, not they are in today, where they were, into happier, better lifestyles. And that is the fundamental principle in decision making that we need to take at this hour. It cannot be rushed into making decisions, but whatever the decision, I believe will be discussed, and I hope it will be discussed with the public.
Vidura, just one.
Can I?
One question, okay. And I'll put a zip in it after that. Vidura, in the 1920s, Sri Lanka's forest cover was around 49%. Between then and 2005, it has reduced by about 20%. I think it's currently at about 24%. And the annual rate of deforestation, we're losing our forest cover by about 1.43% every year. You were talking about the need to reduce carbon emissions, but while we are not reducing carbon emissions, it also appears that our carbon sink is becoming smaller and smaller. The way you see it from an environmental perspective, how big of a role has deforestation played in the scale of the disasters that we are seeing today in Sri Lanka?
So one of the Uchita spoke about ecosystem services. One of the key ecosystem services that's provided by a forest is actually water management, so that flood prevention is actually built into this. So reducing forest cover has a direct and immediate impact to the scale and the intensity of the flood events that we are going to have. And I add destruction of wetlands as a much more critical part, it's equally or more critical part in terms of flood prevention. And I think this actually comes from, I think Uchita also referred to this earlier, trying to put utilitarian purposes into what is fundamentally natural ecology. So let me explain what this means. We see wetland as a problem. If you go around Colombo, what we have done to, it's really funny. I actually was at one of the, in the previous government, when they started drawing up the flood prevention plan, there was a seminar and I was there, and one of the things that was said was the whole of Colombo was a massive wetland before. So actually talking about flood prevention in a wetland that has been significantly developed is itself a sort of oxymoron. When we see a wetland, we see a potential lake or a potential dry land to build on. And this is really not understanding what is the wetland for, because wetland is the basic sponge where the overflow of water is being absorbed. This is again, we see a difference of not understanding what a river is, what a canal is. River floods occasionally. Canal is constructed so that it doesn't run, because we developed on both sides of the canal. So what we've done is we've taken all the rivers and converted them into canals. So we don't understand the fundamental ecological principles at play. Now, having said that, so it's absolutely critical, because forests are one of the key resilience mechanisms of climate change. I want to also add a particular point of view. In terms of planning for the future, one of the best planning for the future scenarios I've seen actually comes from Netherlands, which is a country which is below sea level, and you can see this on YouTube. There's plenty of videos on how Netherlands does flood defense. Now I want to point it out simply because of this. We talked about adequate response to the scale of the problem. So how is Netherlands planning their flood defense? What they are doing is they've created a massive fund, and they are going up and buying the land of people who are currently in the floodplain, helping them move to higher elevations, and creating an area that the river can flood without impacting human habitation. Right? How have they managed to finance this project? What they've done simply is saying that every year when this river floods, we have so much of economic damage, which is spent, as Suchita mentioned, really on just recovery process. So what if we collect all this money, put it in a fund, and create resilience in its true sense of the word? My understanding is that current climate change scenarios that we are facing requires us to take this type of bold actions. We need to take that type of a future-looking energy scenarios where the renewable energy is our base energy. But we are in a situation where we can't get our head out of coal power. That is how backward our thinking is. And if that is the level of our thinking is, and that's the level of our policy making, we will be cursed to be forever a third world country who is every year trying to recover from the last disaster.
Sarita?
Yeah, my question is for Mr. D'Souza. Mr. Alpanav earlier said that there is little knowledge of climate change and environment issues. He even mentioned the situation at universities, but in the long run maybe you need to completely overhaul the academic system. But in the short term, there are advisors attached to ministries. You yourself is an advisor. How much space is given for your input, and does it actually factor in development projects?
I'm the lucky advisor. I come up with the first ever sustainable development ministry in this country, and which is the first ever or the only sustainable development ministry in Asia Pacific region. Now what it means is that in one way, one side there's a clean blank sheet to start planning on, which is fantastic for someone like me who has spent 30 years in activism trying to push the bill on sustainability and finally being called to serve on this platform. But on the other hand is that how much of sustainability understanding, sustainable development knowledge or comprehension do we have inside the planning mechanism of a country? And how is that planning mechanism, are they ready to embrace what transformation is all about? Now, I think there is a sense of readiness, which is why a new ministry would have been envisaged and created. And we take it as a positive measure, and that is why we are also reaching out. But how far are we from this? I think it's a matter of how we engage now very quickly into devising new regulatory and policy frameworks, and how do we prepare the institutional framework to be geared towards implementing the transformation. And whether our mindsets can be changed within the next 15 years into that. The discussion has started. Whether the discourse is gelling in is a long question. And that, to tell you, I think we have to get out of fragmentation, and we can't say that we have to have a growth model on one side and have sustainable development on the other, and then we say that we are for a zero carbon agreement, commitment in this country, and then go for more coal power plants. So this Jekyll and Jekyll cannot happen. But I think it does happen anywhere on earth. We have 500 plus multilateral environmental agreements signed within the UN system, but the world is in a worse place than 1992 when we signed on to the Agenda 21. And now we have a new agenda for 2030. So Sri Lanka is not alone in this. The mindset must transform into mindfulness. And that is the pathway that we are looking for. And I believe that there's a ray of hope. And that is why people like us have joined in the force.
Before we go in for a short commercial break, we have a question coming in through our Facebook page. This question is directed to Major Navaratna. It's from Nandasena Madhugoda, who says, shouldn't the DMC be a part of preparing a resettlement and livelihood restoration plan for affected people and areas and provide solutions as soon as possible? Shouldn't they also look at appointing a task force under district secretaries, AGAs, the UDA special forces and implement plans? What's your response to this, Major Navaratna?
Reconstruction, of course, is the most difficult part of our job. If you consider the Myriabad incident, still people are complaining. It is not easy, but process is on, and it takes time, and resettlement is just overnight. You can't do anything. You have to go and search for lands, and so many things to be considered, not only disaster management but all other stakeholders, government. So it takes time, and I would like to start from Udita. Udita was talking about Netherlands system. I was so lucky to go and visit that river. It's a nice, if I am not mistaken, it is Rand River project. I saw a river bank 20 feet, and I saw another bank more other than that. I asked, what is this? This is the bank for 2020. So they have planned for that. What we do here is we create disaster and we respond, we provide relief, and again we create disaster. We make rivers, sorry, I beg your pardon, we make roads, highways, constructions, hierarchy buildings, and when collapse, we go and respond, provide relief. And again, that is a cycle. When you go to Japan, they study, do research, apply, and see whether it is they can go ahead with that, and there is anything to be changed, they change, and they proceed with that. But here in Sri Lanka, we create disaster, and we respond, and we provide relief, and it's like a cycle. So if you consider this Netherlands system, actually we got a lot of equipment from Netherlands also for this disaster early warning mechanism, all that missions we got from Netherlands. So that is why I said we had to go and search for best practices from other countries, and we have to revisit the entire system if we really want to face the future consequence of disasters.
All right, I think on that note we can go in for a short commercial break. We'll be back with the final round. Welcome back. This is the final round of Face the Nation. My final round of questions for our eminent panel. Mr. De Souza, people know what development is, but do people know what exactly sustainable development is and its role in going forward? If the masses are not made aware, can we take this message across beyond panel discussions and conferences?
Firstly, depends on who you are asking what sustainable development is. If just 1% of the world population takes the 80% or whatever of the resources, obviously they don't understand sustainable development. But if you go to the roots and just, the example of Bhutan, of the gross national happiness, which comes from wisdom of wanting to coexist with their nature, knowing that by coexistence they can exist. And that is where the development paradigm has been so poor on earth, and we continue to run after a dream and chasing ambulances for such a long time, saying that we are going to develop and showing other countries which have developed. But look at where the world is. Where has development taken us on earth? Towards climate refugeeship and being destitute on earth. So obviously we are not asking the correct people the correct questions, or we are not empowering the people who should be honestly making decisions on sustainability.
How are we going to go about empowering these people that matter?
First of all, I think policy, the problem with policy making world over is a very exclusive scenario. It excludes many and includes a very few. That is the first fundamental problem that we have. Whether we can look at processes like the Panchayat or the Grama Swaraj and look at how decisions were made and is being made, and say you include people. If people's aspirations are not met in policymakers making and then it is implemented, those are forced destinies and destinations for people. So I think first of all we need to start looking at other people and including them, and we call this stakeholder engagement, and that can't be cosmetic.
All right, thank you very much, Major Navaratna. My final question to you for the night. How difficult has your task become at the DMC, given the extent of illegal constructions taking place across the island?
Well, I must say that our role and task before that. Disaster Management Center is only a coordination body. We do not have any authority or power to implement anything, but what we do is we coordinate the entire country, because different ministries, different organizations have their mandates. Do you believe
that the DMC needs to go beyond the role of coordinator?
That is why I said the revision should be done, because we do not have any authority in our hand. Only thing is we coordinate. We do not have resources, right? That is why I said now if you take coastal conservation, they can go and say, okay, if there is a house on the beach, they can say, okay, demolish, break it. Otherwise, within 7 days, they can go and demolish it. They have that authority. But disaster management do not have any authority, only a coordination body, and with the stakeholders, with the government agencies, NGOs, INGOs, plus international agencies. We only do coordination. Only thing we can expedite with those organizations, and we can, keep on pressurizing them to act. But I don't think, but that is what I said, we have to have some, sort of legal authority, because today, as my friend said, there should be legal authority, legal power, quick decision. Otherwise, you cannot change the system. That's why I always say you must see other countries, what are the best practice they have developed. Because we are in between, neither Western nor Sri Lankan way. So we have to step up, or we have to go back and change our system. Otherwise, we will be in trouble, deep trouble in future. So I always say revision has to be done immediately.
All right, thank you very much. And finally, Vidura Ralapanava, The colleague before you spoke about changing attitudes and the importance of changing attitudes. As an environmentalist, how do we go about changing people's attitudes in order to ensure that natural calamity is kept at a minimum?
That's a tough one. Honestly, I don't know. I've been trying my own way, and I think it really comes back to the lack of, earlier we touched on lack of climate change knowledge, but it's really, where it comes from is lack of ecological knowledge. We live in a planet which is a very complex ecosystem. If you do not know how this works, if you do not know it from a very holistic point of view, not from a very instrumental point of view, you are going to continue to create problems. And this is a problem. Now, earlier Nadim asked about forestry. What do we call a forest? Right now we have teak forests. We have cashew forests. These are not forests. So we don't even understand what a forest is. We don't understand what a river is. We don't understand what a wetland is. We don't understand what a climate system is. And if you are operating where your fundamental assumptions are really not ecological, you are just going to create more and more problems here. So my understanding is that we need to get this level of thinking and knowledge which we had and lost back into people, because if you think about Sri Lankan hydraulic civilization that existed for a long time before the modern civilization came, it came from a holistic understanding on how the river systems, how the water flow actually works. So it's not that we have to recreate this, we need to rediscover the principles upon which we did such a massive development and bring it back and apply it into local context. So this is not always about looking for Western knowledge, it's also about rediscovering our own knowledge and really creating our own pathway which is consistent with the way the ecology works.
All right, thank you very much. Of course, want to thank all the guests who are on tonight's show, starting off with Major Dhammika Navaratna, Assistant Director, Emergency Operations at the Disaster Management Center. Thank you for being on the show tonight. Also, Mr. Uchitha De Souza, Sustainability Advisor of the Ministry of Sustainable Development and Wildlife. Thanks for being on the show. And finally, Vidura Ralapanava, environmentalist. Thanks for being on the show tonight. I think from everything that was spoken of and discussed at this discourse, we need to realize that Sri Lanka definitely needs to act fast, bring in mechanisms to ensure maximum disaster risk reduction and resilience is in place, to ensure that the citizenry knows what to do, how to act when and before a disaster takes place. Also, the importance of sustainability in development was discussed, as well as the importance of improving literacy with regard to climate change and ecological balance of the country. Thanks for joining us tonight on our special edition with regard to disaster preparedness, disaster risk reduction and resilience. Thanks a lot Nadim Majid, Faraj Shaukat Ali and Charita Fernando for being with us on the show. Remember, as Voltaire said, men argue, nature acts. Good night, Sri Lanka.